There are three broad categories that essentially form a feedback loop of progression, and you need to implement all three of these in order to have the best chance of progressing effectively. Learning and understanding. This is incredibly important because without this you don't know what you don't know. It becomes a goal for you to aim for and provides context for why you need to do a certain thing. Practice. Practice allows us to integrate the learning and understanding from the previous stages into our own subjective experience. So until you physically try to execute that punch, you will not know why it's important to do certain things from the learning stage. Self-correction and refinement. And this is the most overlooked in the process, but is essential to both improve but also to break plateaus. So basically, if you aren't aware of what you're doing, then you don't know what to correct and refine, and you're essentially flying blind. Now, the reason I wanted to make this video is because when I'm helping out people with their technique, one of the most common things I hear back is, why can't I make it look like yours? We can think of levels of skill as existing on a continuous scale. On one end, there's the total beginner who fumbles around the movements in a clunky manner, and he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and in the classic model, he would be considered the unconscious incompetent. At a further point in this scale, we have the person who has pretty competent technique and they have quite a bit of experience in training as well. The way this person moves is vastly improved over the beginner, and they could be considered as a conscious competent. Then at the opposite end to the beginner, we have the expert who has a vast amount of training experience and doesn't have to think about what they're doing anymore. Everything has become intuitive and they are the unconscious competent. Now, the natural conclusion you might draw from this is that the distance from beginner to conscious competent is the same as conscious competent to expert, but this is absolutely not the case. The competence hierarchy is commonly presented in a linear fashion, which leads people to believe that progression is predictable and steady. And I did a quick search and found an image that confirms this. So as you can see, this diagram represents the stages and progressions as similar. And for the sake of this video, let's think of these as representing consistent training and time. Now, if I were to make an accurate graph of what this should look like, it may be something more like this. And as you can see, the beginner moves out of the unconscious competency stage in an incredibly small amount of time. All it usually takes for beginners to progress out of this stage is for somebody to highlight to them what they're doing wrong. And then you could say they've become aware of their mistakes, and they're no longer unconscious of their incompetency, hence becoming consciously incompetent. In terms of clock time, the progression between these two stages can happen in as little as 1 to 2 training sessions, provided that person is practicing the same skills each time. From the conscious incompetency stage, there's now a much larger span of time and experience that is required to where that person can become consciously competent, meaning they know what to do, but it requires a lot of effort in order to perform optimally. The progression between these two stages can take anywhere between 1 to 4 months of consistent and focused practice. Then finally, we can see that the progression from conscious competent to unconscious competent is an enormous disparity of time and consistent training, which can take anywhere from 3 to 10 years of consistent training to reach. So what we can learn from this is that there's a larger and larger disparity in both terms of training time and understanding the more skilled that you become. Put simply, once you're at a decent level, the gains become ever more incremental and they take longer to acquire, but not only that, they usually require an advanced level of technical understanding, athletic prowess and strength to even make them applicable in the first place. There is a huge advancement in the early stages when the beginner learns the fundamentals, which on the surface can seem quite small and inconsequential, but actually result in an exponential improvement in skill. And this is why I'm always hammering home so much this stuff on this channel. And on top of that, without those fundamentals, you'll never actually be able to learn the higher level skills anyway. So many people misunderstand the importance of this and they end up trying to run before they can walk, which results in shooting themselves in the foot. And the way this expresses itself in my experience is those people misidentify which stage they're at and consequently don't know how they should be training for that given stage. And this can be due to many factors, but lack of patience and outcome dependence are chief among them, which are both intrinsically linked because patience is an absolute necessity due to the sheer amount of training that's required to reach advanced levels, and outcome dependence because if their enjoyment of the process hangs upon the results rather than just for the love of doing it, then they won't stick it out long enough to get to where they want to be. So notice I said the way they should be practicing, not what they should be practicing or the methods that they should be using. As you progress through the stages, many of the tools you use in order to hone your skill remain largely the same, yet the way in which you do them is very much different. For example, shadowboxing is a modality that you should be using all the way throughout your martial arts journey, but the way the beginner will utilize this is vastly different to the expert. The beginner should be using it at its most basic level and very slowly maneuvering his body into the correct positions repeatedly in order to gain a basic semblance of how the techniques are supposed to feel. So when he's at this stage, you certainly shouldn't be trying to execute the movements quickly or with high intention, and in many cases doing this can actually stifle the progress moving forwards. Now contrast this to how a seasoned martial artist would utilize shadowboxing. It's the same tool with a vastly different application. A place where this phenomenon expresses itself is if you go to a gym that's got a combat section. So at my local gym, there's always a group of teenagers who want to spar together and basically, punch each other's lights out, which which is all well and good, but they don't actually practice any technique on top of that as well, and consequently never get any better. So in contrast to what I said earlier, in that a greater degree of athleticism and mind-muscle connection is required to make advanced refinements, the changes that the beginner can make overwhelmingly don't require any greater degree of athleticism to implement than they currently have, and they can be implemented instantly. Something like learning to rotate the body through the movements as opposed to just punching with the arms will upgrade that beginner's technique by many degrees with one simple adjustment, and this explains the phenomenon of newbie gains. So to give a quick recap of this video, basically those 3 stages kind of encompass what you need to be doing in your training. You need to obviously learn what you need to do to then take into your practice to be able to actually work on that skill, and then you need to be able to self-study and correct to make sure you're on the right track and slowly progress through those stages. So I hope you enjoyed this one today, guys, and before we close out, I just want to let you know that I'm getting close to completing my first online course now. I did a poll on the channel before and asked people what they would most like to see put into a course, and the top answer was the fundamentals of clean techniques. So it kind of makes sense with a lot of stuff I study on this channel. So I just want to let you know that that'll be coming soon, and thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.